she was descended, her mother was an Adams, so she was descended from John Adams, and also from her two great uncles were Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, who opened up Japan, and then, no, excuse me, Commodore
Matthew
Calbreth Perry, who opened up Japan.
There were 5 brothers in the Navy, and the oldest was, which was the oldest?
Battle of 1812?
Yeah.
That was Oliver Hazard
Oliver
Perry.
Hazard was
the Battle of 1812.
Yeah.
And he was killed in that battle.
And there was a brother.
I'm not sure.
Matthew Calbreth Perry was the one that opened up Japan. And another brother was Christopher Raymond Perry, who was lost in the Navy at sea in South America.
That was the one that I showed you the picture of the little boy.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And I forget who, Matthew Calbreth, Oliver Hazard, and what was my great-grandfather's name?
Alexander James Perry, or James Alexander Perry.
Was it?
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? It doesn't ring a bell anymore.
I think that's right. Anyway. So she had this very interesting historic genealogy. Her family came over.
Her father was in the Army, and he was stationed in the Quartermaster Corps in various parts of the country as it really was developing. And that included Texas and Oklahoma, I think, and further west. She was a young girl in San Francisco at a period when there was a big ball for young women, sort of a coming out party kind of an arrangement. And so she was well traveled and really always took charge of her own life pretty much. And I remember her as a boy always being a little frightened of her because she was sort of domineering. And I'm sure my grandfather felt the same way, although I never knew him. I'd met him a couple of times when I was younger than a teenager, I guess, in 7, 8, or 9 years old, when he would come to New York for a quick visit. I remember seeing him in our house, our apartment in New York, and that's about all, except that he did give me my first big standard gauge electric train for Christmas.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the ones that have engines this big, you
Sure.
know. So I don't know. I wish I'd known him more because he sounded like a fascinating person. And
but she apparently talked endlessly about her life and her travels and her crossing the country and being chased by Indians. And it's just a shame that there was no recording device. And
yeah.
In the house, when we emptied the house, she had so much genealogy. She traced her ancestry back to Charlemagne.
Really?
And to Pippin le Bref. Well, I think old people tend to do this, but she did it in a big way. And she loved all her ancestry and talked about. I just wish I'd known her. She must have been a fascinating woman. And she was so involved in the life of Princeton. And after Junius had left, she helped start the Present Day Club and the auxiliary, the infirmary at Princeton. And
Well, she was very anti
billboards.
billboard advertising.
Yes.
So that we would be taken out, my sister and I'd be taken out on Sunday drives in the limousine with the chauffeur, and she would have us stop at each of the billboards as she came across them and to check whether they had their license or not. Oh,
But she certainly must have been a powerhouse and very important in the whole life of Princeton, of getting things started. I mean, not only the Present Day Club, but
but the town.
the Garden Club.
Mm-hmm.
She was very involved in the Garden Club as well, and I think was presidents of all these various organizations at various periods. And she must have had a wonderful secretary, because when we were emptying the house, all the minutes of their meetings were all just in perfect order. And those organizations were very appreciative of that. But would you like to hear a little bit about emptying the house? Because that was just daunting.
Sure, go ahead.
Would you?
What? Emptying the house?
Well, the house was just stuffed with stuff. They never threw anything away. I found a little ball of string that said, too small to save, but they'd saved it. But there were over 3,000 magazines. There were clothes that we gave to the Metropolitan, materials that went to the Brooklyn Museum. The Dutch room went to the Historical Society in Newark. They subsequently sold it to a interior decorator. But there was just so much stuff that they saved and bought and collected. And it was a huge undertaking, trying to figure out who might want what. And because...
Well, particularly it was really her. She was the one who never threw anything out. She just saved everything, thinking it was important.
Well, and he had bought a lot of stuff. They
weren't around very long together, so.
Well,
this is where you found so much stuff about World War I.
Hmm?
About World War I.
Oh, and then there was so much stuff to do with World War I. I mean, he was a member. He was in the ambulance corps. Is that what you said? Is the name of it?
Well, I think it was called the
American Field Service.
American Field Service.
Yeah.
And he was very involved.
But he was very independent at that point,
And also, J.P. Morgan's daughter was very busy in Europe with the soldiers and helping people. But they had recipes for special cakes. I can't remember. It was endless. And little cards and little just all sorts of things to do with World War I. And she was particularly involved in this organization called the Women's Land Army of America during the Great War, where they raised fruit and vegetables. It must have been a fascinating organization. Powerhouse is very influential in Princeton in the growth of all sorts of organizations.
You said her family came over from
the Mayflower.
The Mayflower.
Yes, they did, and settled in Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big Perry museum there in Newport. I thought, no,
Are you
it's not
sure they
Newport.
came over on the Mayflower?
Yes. We have all that stuff about it. And the Morgans came over very early on and settled in Springfield. And there's a lot of, about them. I don't think it was quite as early as the Mayflower,
And then
but
moved
shortly afterwards.
and moved to whatchamacallit.
They lived outside of New York City and
But they moved to
Hartford.
Hartford, yeah.
Yes, where they were very. Hartford they had, the Wadsworth Museum in Hartford.
Yeah.
They were very busy with that, very influential. Well, all through, I think they were farmers to begin with, and then they made quite a lot of money probably in real estate. Anyway, they were very well to do, and his father was in London.
Whose father?
Junius's father was in London for years, for 10, 15, 20 years with doing business. Wasn't it his father?
I thought so.
George Hale, who built Bedford Hall. No, it was her.
No.
It was the grandmother's father, who was the father also of J.P. That's what it was, sorry.
The wife was the daughter of J.P.
No, it was the sister.
Sister.
J.P. and
Sarah
Sarah Spencer were brother and sister. And she married a Morgan married a Morgan.
Yeah.
She married
That
George Hale Morgan.
complicated it
Yeah,
even more.
it's complicated. Anyway. So they weren't the nouveau riche group who were rising in America. They already had it all.
The Morgans.
What?
The Morgans.
Both.
Oh.
Yeah, on both sides. His money came from his mother, who was a sister of J.P.
Okay.
And then Junius was the nephew, who was very close. They were very close, closer than his children, I think, even. And Junius was very active, not only with the art museum here and the library here at Princeton, but with the Morgan Library, and helped get introduced JP to his first director, and when he left, sent books and for information about books, was in touch with the Morgan Library, and he really got his uncle collecting books. Prior to that, he'd been collecting art and other stuff, but he really got the Morgan Library going. On her mother's side, she was descended from John Adams. And yes, we had a portrait in the front hall of John Adams. I don't know if it's in this picture, which is now in the National Portrait Gallery.